Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome here to the Launchpad and our live launch coverage of OneWeb 16 launching from Slick 4E, from launching from Slick 4D at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name's Zach. I'm the founder and host here at the Launchpad, and you're joining us for our live launch coverage. Many of you were expecting to see a double header here tonight with OneWeb 16, but also with Starlink 2-4. Unfortunately, due to weather conditions at Vandenberg Space Force Base, the SpaceX teams have scrubbed tonight's launch out of California. And have delayed it 24 hours, hoping weather conditions will improve. So, not a double header tonight, but we still do have one mission here today with OneWeb 16, and we are counting now down just over 17 minutes until launch, and SpaceX is going to begin their live stream here in just a couple of minutes. So, as always, we're going to run through everything we know about today's mission, but if you have questions, you can send those to us in the chat by tagging us at the Launchpad, and I'll be answering those throughout today's launch stream and through the coast phase as we count down towards deployment of today's OneWeb satellites. If it's your first time here, though, make sure you engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, space briefing, space news update, or exclusive one-on-one interview. OneWeb deployments are going to take up to about an hour and a half for all of them, so we're going to see if SpaceX stays live for those, and if they do, we will, of course, stay with you here. The first deployments of OneWeb will occur about 58 minutes into today's flight, so lots of time to answer questions. If you want to know more about today's mission, you can, of course, click that pinned link or the link in the description, which will load you up into our TLP mission briefing for today for OneWeb 16 on tlpnetwork.com. That's where you can stay up to date on all the launches globally happening and whether we'll be bringing you live coverage of them or not. And our new mission briefings will be launching here in just the next couple of days. We're super excited to get these more detailed mission briefings out to you. So stay tuned for that. But for today, you can follow along with today's mission. Booster 1076 going for its second flight here. Its last flight was in November with CRS-2, which actually undocked from the International Space Station earlier today. 48 OneWeb satellites. I believe that should be 18 OneWebs. Let me double check that number here. Bear with me. Is it 48? 40. We have to fix that. 40 OneWeb satellites are on board the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket here today, and they will be launching, as we said, over the hour and a half period of time there. SpaceX is getting ready to begin their live feed, so of course we're going to patch them in and listen in to SpaceX Mission Control for an update on the rocket, as this is a customer mission. They're going live a little bit earlier, and of course they'll talk through a bit about OneWeb, so we'll be answering your questions then. So make sure you send in those questions by tagging us at the Launchpad, and we hope you'll join us, of course, back here tomorrow for the launch of Starlink 2-4 with another launch attempt scheduled for then. But one launch here tonight, OneWeb 16, just over 15 minutes and counting. Weather is 95% go, and everything is proceeding well through propellant load down at Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. See a couple questions coming in the chat. Great to have you here. Use for illusion. Do you host a Twitter space? We do have Twitter. We haven't hosted any spaces yet. But it is something that is on our list to do. We did just launch the TLP Reddit. So if you're a user of Reddit and you enjoy that, definitely come on over, join the TLP community there. That's where we're going to have, of course, you can stay up to date on live announcements, news updates, and things like that, but also just a really great space for the whole space community to gather together and talk about everything that's happening. We're going to do some polls on there as well as community conversations. So make sure you hit that follow button over there and join us on the TLP Network Reddit. You can also join us over on Discord. It's free to join. And those links are in the description as well as in the chat as well. But if you're just joining us, welcome here to the Launchpad. You're joining us for our live launch coverage of just one launch this evening. The second was unfortunately scrubbed due to weather. But OneWeb 16 counting down now 14 minutes until launch. Shades, thank you so much for being a member for 14 months. We so appreciate your continued support. You make us be able to do what we do and bringing you the best possible coverage of everything space. We'll obviously address the elephant in the room. Earlier today, the historic launch out of the United Kingdom, unfortunately ending in failure. Not much more has been known, and it may take days or weeks for us to actually learn anything more about what occurred. But at this time, having reviewed some of the video data, it does look that one of the fairings may not have separated from the second stage, which would have possibly led to a off-balance load, which could have led the second stage actually into a tumble, which would answer why we saw all those weird telemetry spikes at one point and then kind of everything nulled out. But that is a hypothesis, and that is not confirmed yet by Virgin Orbit, and we'll be awaiting that. But they are now launching their investigation for the FAA and the CAA. Both the United States and the British United Kingdom launch agencies will require investigations before they issue another launch license. But as we count down 13 minutes to launch, this is in to SpaceX Mission Control for OneWeb 16.
On your screen is a live view of Falcon 9 awaiting its 11:50 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral in Florida. Now tonight's launch is for our customer, OneWeb, a connectivity wholesaler that delivers high-speed, low-latency connectivity solutions to telecommunications companies, internet service providers, local governments, businesses, and communities everywhere. Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Anderson. I'm a production engineering manager here at SpaceX, and I'll be your host for the OneWeb Launch 16 mission, which marks our 201st overall mission to date. As the mission name suggests, this is OneWeb's 16th overall launch and second with SpaceX. Similar to our previous launch with OneWeb last month, tonight's launch will also send 40 OneWeb satellites into low Earth orbit, bringing their LEO constellation to over 80% completion with 542 satellites in space. Now tonight we will deploy OneWeb satellites in 3 different deployment sequences. And as a note, part of the second and potentially the third deployment sequence will begin during a blackout period. Now, if we're able to regain connection with the second stage earlier than that, then we'll be sure to provide live coverage, so stay tuned. Now, if you're interested in reviewing the full deployment schedule, check out SpaceX.com. Now, at T-minus 11 minutes and 45 seconds, the weather, range, and vehicle are all go for launch. If for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, January 10th at 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, with that, let's learn a little bit more about OneWeb and today's mission.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We are counting down 11 minutes, 22 seconds, and counting into the launch of 40 OneWeb satellites on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Weather is 95% go. As you saw there a minute ago, the rocket was well into propellant load, and everything has been proceeding nominally towards today's flight. If you haven't yet, take a moment, engage that like button. It really does help us out, and we appreciate that support there. And share out the stream as well if you can. Let people know that still a chance to see a successful launch here today. Was originally going to be a triple launch day plus the ISS Cargo Dragon undocking stream. The undocking was successful. We had the launch, but unfortunately failure of Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1, so we're hoping to end tonight on a high with a successful launch and deployment of 40 OneWeb satellites. Interesting point, OneWeb is a competitor to SpaceX's Starlink, but yes, they are launching on a SpaceX rocket. So we're excited to see this is the second OneWeb launch on a Falcon 9 following the invasion of Ukraine. OneWeb lost their ability to launch on the Russian Soyuz rocket and had to look for a new opportunity, and they looked and turned to SpaceX, as well as I believe they've got a couple launches scheduled on the Indian launch vehicle as well coming up later this year. Again, if you guys have questions, you can send us those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll be answering those live over the course of today's stream and coast phase. So you can just make sure you put that tag in there. That'll flag it in our system so we don't end up missing any of your questions or comments, as we love being able to answer those. If you were expecting, as we said, a double header, unfortunately due to weather in California, they had to scrub today's flight, and they will try again 24 hours from now. So we hope you'll join us for that back here tomorrow. I think, like Flint and Steel says, when your competition still has to come to you to launch their satellites, you're doing something right. Falcon 9's reliable. We know it works. It would probably never have happened if the Ukraine invasion had not happened. But SpaceX and Elon had said, why shouldn't they launch? It's still a customer. So even though they are technically competition, they're still now a customer of SpaceX, and SpaceX, of course, will do their best for their customers. Paul's asking what happened to the Virgin launch. What I'm going to do for those, I'm going to direct you to our website. I'll drop the link in the chat there. We did put out an article about what has occurred so far that we know for sure this evening. There are some hypotheses kind of on what has occurred, but from my own personal review, it does look like one of the two fairing halves may not have separated from the second stage, which ultimately would make it off balance and cause it to tumble. Now, this is unofficial. We're waiting for for Virgin Orbit to confirm that. We might get confirmation quickly. It might be something that takes days or weeks for review and investigation. They do not have to release a statement on what happened, but they are under an investigation now with the FAA and the CAA. So we, at this point, would say Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 is grounded. I would think it's very unlikely to see another Launcher 1 launch in the first half of this year, but maybe the second half we could see another attempt. They are now 4 successful, 2 failed launches in their history, and of a total of 6. So not bad actually for technically a new launcher company, but still unfortunate that it happened on such a historic and eye-catching mission. Let's listen back into Mission Control.
From now, let's get to know a little bit more about the rocket that you're looking at there on your screen. Falcon 9 is our 2-stage rocket, which stands 230 feet or 70 meters tall. Now that's roughly 20 meters taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France, which is 49 meters tall. Now, when it's fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. Now, we begin loading those propellants on both stages of the vehicle at T-minus 35 minutes.
Engine chiller started.
Now, starting from the top of the vehicle, our payload today is safely enclosed inside of the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, which is the structure at the very top of the rocket. This protects the satellites from aerodynamic heating, loads,
on internal power.
Aerodynamic heating, loads, and contamination during ascent. Now, once we reach the vacuum of space, we will jettison the fairing halves while the second stage continues to orbit. Now, below the payload fairing, we have the second stage that will take the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload to a low Earth orbit. The satellites on board the second stage today are produced by OneWeb Satellites, a joint venture between OneWeb and Airbus located on Merritt Island, Florida. Second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum, or what we call the MVAC engine, about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then relight for a second time before we deploy the 40 satellites. Now, below the second stage, we have the inner stage, which is part of the first stage. As you can see on your screen, the carbon fiber inner stage is a distinct black color, and that's because it's unpainted TPS, or thermal protection system. Now, this protects the composite material that the inner stage is made of. At the bottom of the first stage, there are 9 Merlin engines that will get Falcon 9 off of the ground and up into the thinner parts of the Earth's atmosphere. And shortly after liftoff, the first and second stages will separate from one another. Then the second stage will continue to orbit, while the first stage will start to make its way back down to Earth. The first stage is designed to be reflown with minimal refurbishment between flights. Now, the first stage supporting today's mission will be flying for the second time and attempt landing at Landing Zone 1, which is not too far from where it will lift off. Now, if we're successful in recovering the booster on screen, it will mark the 162nd successful recovery of an orbital class booster. And lastly, the large trusted structure that you see there next to the vehicle is called the transporter erector, or the TE, or which you may have heard called the strongback on the nets. Now, we use it to roll the rocket out to the launch pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. The TE also routes the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and satellites until Falcon 9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. Now, at liftoff, it will retract in order to clear the way for Falcon 9's
Strongback
ascent.
lower has started.
And we did hear that call out that the sequence will begin. That means that the clamp arms, which are right below the fairing there that you see on your screen, they will open up first. Once they are fully open, then the TE can begin to recline away from the vehicle. Now, at T0, ground hydraulic systems will pull the TE even further away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. And on your screen, it looks like the clamp arms are now just about fully open. This means that the TE will begin to retract away from the vehicle.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We are now just over 3.5 minutes from launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where weather is 95% go. For those that were also expecting a Starlink mission 2-4, excuse me, unfortunately, due to weather conditions in Vandenberg, California, that mission has been delayed 24 hours. So just one launch tonight, but we got to do it all again tomorrow with the Starlink mission. But as we get down through the final count, you can see that strong back retract now occurring at Slick 40. Propellant load just topping off the last little bit of the tanks on the second stage, and Falcon 9 will be ready to launch 40 OneWeb satellites into orbit. If you haven't yet, take a moment, engage that like button, share out the broadcast as we enter the final countdown. And as always here at the launch pad, we like to get a go, no go from you guys. So let's see that in the chat. And let's listen back into SpaceX Mission Control as we count down 2 minutes, 48 seconds and counting till launch.
Out into the Florida air, the humid, moist air condenses into clouds or water, which is what you see there. At T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Just inside T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin 1D engines for liftoff. The OneWeb Launch 16 payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the vehicle. Weather is still looking good for T0, and the range is green for launch. So if for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, January 10th at 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Now just waiting for the call out for propellant loading on stage 2.
Stage 2, lock load complete.
Perfect timing. There's that call out. With prop loading complete on stage 2, that concludes propellant loading on Falcon 9, which means it's now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Now you can kind of see a lot more of those white clouds that I mentioned on your screen.
Yes, launch closeouts.
That is because we are venting out the liquid oxygen line on that transporter erector. We are just clearing out the line in preparation for liftoff. Coming up next is Falcon 9 in startup. Again, that will be where the internal flight computers take over the launch countdown. That is because this Falcon 9 vehicle is autonomous.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And great news, Falcon 9 is now in startup. We are now just waiting for the launch director's final call.
SpaceX launch director, go for launch.
And excellent news, all systems are go for launch of Falcon 9 with the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power. And liftoff of Falcon 9. Go Falcon, go OneWeb 2. Pitching downrange.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral, carrying the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload. Now, during ascent, we tilt the engines, which is what we call gimbaling.
Power and telemetry.
That turns the rocket horizontally, which is what we call a gravity turn. Now, we're still going up, but we are now also heading horizontally away from the launch pad.
Vehicle supersonic.
Moments ago, we did throttle down the engines on the first stage in preparation for Max Q, which is coming up here in a few seconds.
Max Q.
Great news, we have just passed through the largest structural load that the vehicle sees on ascent. Really awesome views here of the first stage vehicle. Now the rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and to get into orbit. So you can keep an eye out on the stage 1 telemetry, and that's on the bottom left hand of your screen. Again, incredible views of the first stage vehicle, first stage engines lighting up there. We do have 5 events coming up here back to back. That will be MECO, main engine cutoff, stage separation, stage 1 flip, SES-1, the boost back burn on the first stage, and then we will also have the fairing halves deploy. Again, that is a few events happening in quick succession: MECO, stage separation, stage 1 flip, SES-1, boost back burn, and fairing deploy.
And MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
And back ignition. Stage 1, boost back startup.
There, we have just seen all of those events, really cool views. We had MECO, stage separation, stage 1 flip, which you can kind of see in the background of the second stage vehicle's view. Awesome view here of the first stage in its boost back burn right now. We also had second stage engine startup 1, which is that MVAC engine lighting up on the right-hand screen. Now next up will be the conclusion of the first stage boost back burn, and then shortly after followed by the fairing deploy.
Stage 1, boost back shutdown.
And there you can see on your left-hand screen as those engines shut down on the first stage. That concludes the boost back burn for the first stage vehicle.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And also got an awesome view of fairing deploy there on your screen. Now those fairing halves,
Both vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
those fairing halves, one flew for a 6 time and the other for a 7 time, and we will be attempting to retrieve these fairing halves again today once they fall back down to Earth using our recovery vessel, Doug, today. Now we are T plus 4 minutes and about 15 seconds into today's mission, and we are in the first of 2 planned MVAC burns before satellite deployment. Now on your screen on the left-hand side is a view from the first stage. It is a little bit dark there, but when we do come up on the entry burn, which is at T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds, you should see those 3 engines reignite on your screen. And that entry burn is where we reignite these 3 engines, and that helps slow the vehicle down as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. Now we need to slow the vehicle down to reduce re-entry forces, which helps us recover and reuse the first stage vehicle. Now during the entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing its Merlin engines. We're also still moving rapidly, so this causes the vehicle to fly through its Merlin exhaust gases, which is also what we refer to as the rocket's plume. And this deposits a layer of soot on the vehicle surface. Now that soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses. And we are just about 30 seconds away from that entry burn beginning on the first stage. On your right-hand screen is a view from the second stage, looking at that MVAC engine glowing very bright there. Now, stage 1 is making its way back to land, and you can see Cape Canaveral there in the background of your left-hand screen just a little bit. It will perform 3 burns for landing. It already completed the boost back burn, now coming up on the entry burn, followed by the landing burn.
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
Great news. As you heard that call out and can see on your screen, we have reignited 3 of the 9 M1D engines on the first stage. That's the center E9 engine, followed by the E1 and E5 engines.
Stage 1 engine burn shutdown.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
It's less than a 20-second burn, and as you can see, the engines have shut down. That concludes the entry burn for the first stage
Both
vehicle.
vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Now we are just about 30 seconds away from the landing burn beginning on the first stage vehicle. It is just the E9 engine that will ignite for landing, and the M1D engines have about 190,000 pounds of thrust, so one engine reigniting is just enough to help slow the vehicle down in time to
Stage
touch down
1
for landing.
transonic.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There you can see the landing burn has begun on Falcon 9. Let's watch as the first stage touches down on landing zone 1.
Landing leg deployed.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Wow, an awesome view of our landing. As you just saw, Falcon 9 has touched down on landing zone 1. That marks SpaceX's 162nd recovery of an orbital class rocket,
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
and that includes first stage landings for both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. Now coming up shortly here, we will have SECO 1, that is second stage engine cutoff 1. That is where we will shut down this MVAC engine and allow the vehicle to coast with the payload before its second burn, and that's coming up here in just a few seconds.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And great news, we have had SECO 1 as well as that call out confirming a good orbit. Now the mission isn't over just yet. The second stage is now embarking on its first coast phase. After the coast phase, we will light that MVAC engine for a second time around T plus 55 minutes. We'll see you back here in about 45 minutes, and in the meantime, enjoy the space tunes.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. 9 minutes, 25 seconds since Falcon 9 lifted off from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and Booster 1076 has landed back at landing zone 1 after completing its second successful mission. If it was your first time here, though, make sure you engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, space briefing, space news update, or exclusive one-on-one interview. It's free to do so. Hit that subscribe button. We're going to take some time now during the coast phase to answer your guys' comments and questions, so you can send those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll be answering those over the next period of time. The next major milestone, as Jesse said there, is going to be second stage start 2, which will be at 55 minutes, 14 seconds into flight, so about 45 minutes from now. Payload deployments will begin at T plus 58 minutes, and will actually take about a half an hour time for all those deployments. So we got a little bit of time ahead of us, but we're going to take some time to answer your comments and questions. We can answer questions about what we know about Virgin Orbit, about today's mission, or anything else that you guys have. Just make sure you tag us at the launch pad so we're able to launch those there. Wanted to say a shout out there to James. Thanks so much for that super chat. Really appreciate your support and helping donate to that rug fund. Haven't heard that one in a while. And again, thanks to a number of our members for their continued support. I think I saw 13 and 14 months there supporting us as members. We really appreciate that. It helps us do what we do, bringing you the best possible coverage. Catching up on the chats here on your guys' question. LR, what was that metal creaking noise on the SpaceX feed? So that was coming from Hawthorne in California at SpaceX headquarters. That's where Jesse was hosting today's broadcast from. And they're up on one of the balconies, and it is an active rocket launch facility. So they are working in the background. So you're just hearing sounds of the warehouse and the factory floor in the background. So that's what you were hearing there with all that creaking. It wasn't the rocket. It was mission control there. Ted asking any news on Launcher 1. No, it's going to be at least a number of days, if not weeks, until we have an update there. There are some reviews that have happened by independent journalists on what we saw on the video feed, the little bits that we saw. I went back and have reviewed the footage that we saw. It almost, to me, unofficially, looked like one of the fairings didn't separate. And if that's true, it would have caused an unstable load balance on the second stage while it was still burning, which could have caused it to tumble, which would have made sense with some of that weird telemetry we saw where it went like warp speed, but then went into like the super depths of the Earth in altitude. The telemetry was really weird. They blamed it on ground station coverage, and then 30-40 minutes later came back and were like, okay, no, we've actually had an anomaly. So we're going to wait for more information officially to come out, but that is one of the things I've heard from a few different people. At one point, there was a camera shot, and it looked like there was 1 out of 2 fairings still on that second stage. So we're going to wait for confirmation on that, but that's what it was looking like there. Riley, when is Starship expected to launch? Well, Elon tweeted stating end of February, March timeline. I think our team was thinking March if everything goes perfectly. More realistically, probably something early summer. But we're keeping a close eye on that, and we'll, of course, bring you full live launch coverage of that to the best of our abilities. We're planning on having a number of our team down there on site for that, thanks to your guys' generous support. So we are keeping a close eye on that. But Elon's time, end of February, March. Real world time, probably a little bit longer. But we'll wait and see. One thing that was noticed today when they were stacking Starship, one of the MVAC engines have always had a remove before flight ring around the vacuum engines. It's not there this time, which likely means we are done seeing any testing of Starship 24. We have some testing to see of Booster, but it is very likely that Ship 24 is now ready for flight. We'll still see some propellant loading tests to test loading the entire ship, but we'll be unlikely we'll see any more static fires of the ship itself. Use your illusion. When will the Starlink constellation be complete? Do we know? Absolutely. Great question. So SpaceX has until mid-2024 to launch the first half of their constellation, and until mid-2027 to launch the rest of it. So they need Starship to work to be able to do so. The Starlink constellation is going to be up to 14,000 satellites, and we're in the about 3,000 mark now. So they still got a long ways to go. So they really do need Starship to come online sooner than later, even in a test phase, for them to start being able to deploy these Starlink satellites a lot more frequently. 105 launches scheduled this year. Probably more than half of those are going to be Starlink. So if you do an average of at least 50 Starlinks per launch, 50 launches, you're talking 2,500 Starlink satellites could be launched in 2023 by Falcon 9 alone. And it's possible there will be even more than that for Starlink launches. So it's going to be a very busy year here. We'll, of course, bring you all those launches live. John Ferris, I'm getting reports of debris falling in China launch. What info do you have? There shouldn't be any debris from a China launch that we've heard of. I'll try to verify with a few sources here, but at this point, I do not believe there's any debris that is coming in. Bear with me just a moment, just trying to verify this. Yeah, I don't have anything from any of our sources saying that there is debris coming in that area. So I don't believe that is true there. Thanks, White Rabbit. Appreciate it. Unfortunately, yeah, White Rabbit, the stocks have not done so well. Virgin Orbit stocks dropped 8% before the U.S. stock market closed, and last I looked, has dropped an additional 28%. since during the off-market hours. So they will open quite down tomorrow, unfortunately. I think big thing I pointed out on that on the launch stream for Virgin Orbit, and I'll point out again here, is this had nothing to do with Spaceport Cornwall or that it was a UK launch. This was a failure of the second stage of Launcher 1. This could have happened if this launch happened in California or Brazil or anywhere else. It's heartbreaking that it happened on this first UK launch, but they'll figure it out and they'll come back and they'll do it again, and we'll go from there. But it is going to take some time. I think it's very unlikely that we will see Launcher 1 launch the first half of this year anymore. I think we'll be looking at the second half of this year at the earliest, as they will have to complete an investigation with the FAA in the United States, but also the CAA in the United Kingdom. Paul, how is it that Starlink is thousands of satellites, but OneWeb is a few hundred? Their deployment altitude is a big part of it. So Starlink deploys at the 500-kilometer elevation. OneWeb, if I remember correctly, is like, let me double check what their elevation is. It's quite a bit higher. Let me just confirm this. 1,200 kilometers. Or 750 miles. So they're over 2 times as high. So due to that, one satellite can cover a much larger area. Now, long run, OneWeb may not be able to offer as high speeds, reduce latency, as many people on it, just because their constellation is further out. Starlink being closer together, your satellite dish will pass between more Starlinks more frequently. But due to that, it spreads out the load more. So that's one of the big differences there, but we'll have to see how ultimately it pans out. Technically, they are competitors, so it's really interesting to see a OneWeb launch on a SpaceX rocket. This is the second one that we have seen. Question coming in the chat. She said kerosene. I thought SpaceX used methane for fuel, or is just the bigger rockets? So the Falcon 9 uses RP1 and liquid oxygen for its Merlin engines. That's the fuel they use on the Falcon 9. Have a good night, Flynn and Steele. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. I'll take a look into that, John Ferris. I haven't heard anything about that being expected. There was a U.S. satellite that came down should have been yesterday, but I have not heard anything about a Chinese rocket. And if it is, it's tiny debris. It's nothing like one of those big ones. We would have a live tracker and everything going if it was. So if anything, it might have just been a small booster or something from China that just so happened to be caught on video there. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We're counting down towards the second burn of the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're expecting that burn to now occur in just about 34 minutes from now. Payload deployments will begin about 3 minutes later. And payload deployments of the 40 OneWeb satellites will take just about a half an hour. So we're answering your questions. You can send us those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll be answering those over the next little bit of the coast phase. Pulsar Echo is asking, in what decade do you think tourism up there will be possible? It already is. With Blue Origin's New Shepard, you've already got tourism going over over the Kármán line for a couple of minutes, and then you come home. But if you are rich, you can buy a mission on a Crew Dragon like we saw on Inspiration 4, or with Axiom Space going to the International Space Station. Now, if you're wanting to talk more open tourism, I think realistically we're talking mid to late 2030s, really seeing that tourism industry pick up. All really depends on how Starship goes, because Starship will open up options of Earth to Earth. We know the U.S. government's interested in it for military applications, and we do know there's an interest in it for human transport, being able to reduce travel times from, say, launching from New York to Shanghai, and that only taking 35 minutes instead of like 14 hours. So I'm not sure space tourism will be the first thing. I think Earth-to-Earth travel will be a big part of it. We do know there will be some private Starship missions as well in the future. So that will begin, but mid-2030s to late 2030s, we'll probably see more everyday people going up. But real tourism, like you just go, you want to go vacation, you book a flight, probably 2040s, late 2040s. But we'll wait and see. Awesome. Will there be any Falcon 9 launches from Vandenberg within the next 10 years? I do not believe Vandenberg has the current ability for Falcon Heavy at Slick 4E. I'd have to confirm that, but I believe last time we looked it did not. So unlikely. There's not really a need for it because they can launch from pad 39A and they can launch in a polar trajectory if they need to, just doing a dogleg maneuver. So it is still something that can happen there. D, when is the next Falcon Heavy launch? Falcon Heavy rolled out to the pad earlier today, and we are targeting a launch on January 13th for the next Falcon 9 launch. That slipped 24 hours in the last 24 hours, so there's still some time. They are going to do some final checkouts in preparation for that launch, but Falcon Heavy is back out on the pad and waiting to be lifted up. Last that I heard, it was still laying on the ground. Paul, will RS1's maiden flight ever happen, or will it go from a firm date to be turned? It keeps getting delayed. Every couple days we get another delay. We're keeping an eye on it. It'll happen. It'll happen this year. I'll say that. We know it'll happen this year. John, would you say SpaceX is the most reliable rocket over all the others? It's hard to beat Soyuz because of its flight history, over 2,000 missions. Soyuz is extremely reliable and extremely old. So is the Long March family, but if you were talking an individual rocket, it would be Soyuz and then Falcon 9. If you're talking new rockets, then yes, Falcon 9. And then after that, after that, you would then go Atlas, Delta 4 Heavy, Delta 4 families, the Atlas family above that, and then you'd go into like Electron and stuff. But Electron's working its way up there pretty quickly. That's because, he was more super. Absolutely, Pulsar. And I think there's some really awesome opportunities coming up in the near future that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into orbit or even go as far as a New Shepard flight. I'm super excited to have signed up with an organization called Worldview to go up to 100,000 feet and spend a few hours actually up at that elevation. And at that elevation, we will still see the curvature of the Earth. We won't experience zero gravity, but we'll still see the curvature of the Earth with some incredible windows. And we're going to have a really incredible flight because we're going up with a stratospheric balloon. So it's 2 hours up, multiple hours at apogee, and about an hour and a half back down. And of course, I'll take you guys along with me. I believe we're looking 2025 for those flights beginning. So I don't know when my flight will be just yet, but super excited to have booked into that and know that in my future I'm going up to 100,000 feet and super excited to get to see that curvature. Seen it a little bit from a plane. You can do that sometimes with right conditions, but at 100,000 feet, it's going to be absolutely incredible. And we're doing it over the Grand Canyon. So what a more beautiful place. You're going to be able to look over the United States, look over towards the ocean, down to Mexico. It's going to be really incredible to see that view. But we got a few years till we get there. On your screen now is a live look at one of the OneWeb satellites there. They're all stacked in there, so we're going to see them slowly shoot off from the side. Some of them are individual, some of them are in pairs in their deployment sequence. We still have one more burn of the second stage MVAC engine of the Falcon 9, that expected 58 minutes in today's flight. So we're just over halfway until we reach that second stage burn. Possum, how many flights do you think Firefly Aerospace will have? So a lot of time when you're looking at those launch calendars, you do have to be aware of a lot of them put missions at the end of 2023 as placeholders because most people aren't looking that far. So even in our system, we have a lot of launches. That's why we show generally about 3 months out on our launch calendar. And then we feature big launches like Artemis 2 and things like that because There are many launches we know are this year, but we do not have firm dates. So what you do is you drop them all on December 31st, 2023, and then as we get dates, we bring them forward, but it helps just prepare the system and have everything ready for that. So bear that in mind. Firefly, we'll probably see at least a couple launches. They were working through some issues from their last flight, so but from last I heard, they do know what the issue was. Excuse me, it's been a long day. And they are getting ready to head back out, make those changes, and go back there. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Do you plan to track Chinese launches? We do put all Chinese launches into our launch calendar, which you can get topnetwork.com/launches. Because it's China, many of the launches do not have views of launch sites, and we are not able to actually have anybody there. They are restricted facilities and launches, so we only get confirmation after they are launched. So unfortunately, we aren't able to live stream most of the Chinese launches, but anything that has to do with their crew or their space station, we generally do cover in that case. Same thing with Russia and Roscosmos. We cover anything that impacts the International Space Station due to the current climate and due to the Russian invasion. We've decided to only cover Roscosmos missions at this point that are actually impacting operations of the International Space Station, so crew and cargo for it. About 30 minutes away from beginning of payload deployment. Thanks so much, Philip. Appreciate you checking it out. Use your illusion. Yeah, I'm super excited. It's gonna be really incredible. Like, try not to get too excited about it because it's still a few years out, but it's definitely getting real. I've met with some of the Worldview team and can't wait to get down there for that flight eventually. I'm hoping sometime to go down this year and bring you guys in for a tour of their facility as they prepare to test the spacecraft, or well, not spacecraft, balloon stratosphere craft, the balloon bubble that goes under the balloon. The craft that we will all fly in. They've been flying balloons for years, but they've yet to fly the actual capsule. That's the word that we will all fly in. LR, the train of just launched SpaceX satellites, were cursed for astrophotographers, or OneWeb known for the same effect. No, because they're at a much higher elevation. And Starlink's done a lot, SpaceX and Starlink have done a lot of things to help mitigate that by putting anti-reflectors, different times, angles, things. So they have tried to help with that, but ultimately, I think, kind of like one of Elon's comments was, long run, taking photos down on Earth maybe shouldn't be our priority anymore. Why aren't we doing it in space? But that obviously doesn't help the whole world. We're still very much an Earth-based civilization. But in 20 years, most of those photos will be taken from orbit or the moon, is kind of the hope. Fairbairn, will there be any launches from the Space Center in Australia this year? There should be, but those generally we don't get announcements of until a lot closer to. I do not believe we have any on the schedule as of yet, but it is something they normally add closer to launch. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate you stopping by. We do cover everybody in space. We believe that space is better together. So we do cover all the countries globally around the world, and we've been covering Russia and their space program impacting the International Space Station. And China, we literally just can't get cameras into. So that's not even our fault. That's China's fault. So if you want us to cover China launches, tell China. We'll be there. We'd be glad to. Some great views that we've been having here from that second stage. Back to the look at the map there. Cutting in and out as we have ground station coverage. Ooh, incredible view there of the OneWeb satellites waiting deployment in just over 28 minutes. We're going to take a little bit of a commentary break here, but you can keep sending in your comments and questions in the chat, and I'll work on answering those when I come back. But stay with us right here on the launch pad as we count down just about 20 minutes until the final second stage burn at the beginning of payload deployment of 40 OneWeb satellites in low Earth orbit. Stay with us. And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad and our continuing live coverage of OneWeb 16. We are now 50 minutes into today's flight. We're about 5 minutes away from the second stage reigniting for a final burn. But coming back here just a couple minutes early as we have received an update from Virgin Orbit. This is not an update I was expecting us to have here this evening. We will, of course, update our article here momentarily, but we're going to take a quick pause away from SpaceX. And you're going to see this along with me. This just was released in the last about 2 minutes here. We got this notification. Historic UK mission reaches space, but falls short of orbit. The historic first launch, the first attempt to launch satellites from British soil reached space late last night, but ultimately fell short of reaching its target orbit. After successfully taking off from runway at Spaceport Cornwall, which just a few weeks ago was transformed from a mere slab of empty cement to a commercial airport at the world's newest space launch operations center, and traveling to a designated drop zone, Cosmic Girl, the customized 747 that serves as the Launcher One system carrier aircraft, successfully released the rocket. The rocket then ignited its engines, quickly going hypersonic and successfully reaching space. We did see it reach about 500,000 feet on the telemetry before it got weird. The flight then continued through a successful stage separation and ignition of the second stage. However, at some point during the firing of the rocket's second stage engine, with the rocket traveling at a speed more than 11,000 miles per hour, the system experienced an anomaly, ending the mission prematurely. Though the mission did not achieve its final orbit, by reaching space and achieving numerous significant first-time achievements, it represents an important step forward. The effort behind the flight brought together new partnerships and integrated collaboration from a wide range of partners, including the UK Space Agency, the Royal Air Force, and the Civil Aviation Authority, and the US's FAA, the National Reconnaissance Office, and more, and demonstrated that space launch is achievable from UK soil. Out of 5 Launcher One missions carrying payloads for private companies, there was a 6th that was a test flight for their own payload. But out of the 5 missions that have carried payloads for private companies and government, this is the first to fall short of delivering its payloads to their precise target orbit. Dan Hart, the CEO of Virgin Orbit, says, "While we are very proud of many things that we've successfully achieved as part of this mission, we are mindful that we failed to provide our customers with the launch service they deserved. The first-time nature of the mission added layers of complexity that our team professionally managed through. However, in the end, a technical failure appears to have prevented us from delivering the final orbit. We will work tirelessly to understand the nature of the failure, make corrective actions, and return to orbit as soon as possible as we completed a full investigation and mission insurance." The director of the commercial spaceflight for the UK Space Agency saying, "Last night, Virgin Orbit attempted the first orbital launch from Spaceport Cornwall. We have shown the UK is capable of launching to orbit, but the launch was not successful in requiring orbit. We will work closely with Virgin Orbit as they investigate." And he goes on about Spaceport Cornwall and being the future launch provider in Europe and that. And Melissa Thorpe, the head of Spaceport Cornwall, "We're incredibly proud of everything we've achieved. With our partners and friends from the space industry here in the UK and the US, we made it to space, a UK first. Unfortunately, we learned that an anomaly occurred, which means we didn't have a successful mission." And I think that right there is a big part of it. This mission was partially successful. A rocket made it to space from the UK soil. Unfortunately, it did not make it to orbit, and the payloads were lost. But that's an update from Virgin Orbit. We'll update our article on the website here following payload deployments or during payload deployments. Of course, we're keeping an eye on that as we are now coming up to just a couple minutes. Jesse's talking, so let's listen back in to Mission Control as we approach the second burn of the MVAC engine of the second stage of tonight's Falcon 9 rocket.
As well as the second stage has completed its first burn. Now we are just about 45 seconds away from the second ignition of the MVAC engine, which will carry the second stage and the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload into the orbit needed to deploy the satellites. Now this burn will be super short. It lasts only just a couple of seconds, but is enough thrust to allow the vehicle to coast to its next targeted drop-off orbit for the payload. Now again, we are just about 15 seconds away from SES-2, or second stage engine start 2, and SECO-2, which is second stage engine cutoff 2. Coming up here in just a few seconds.
Waiting for that call out. Very quick, about 2.5, 3 second burn. You can see the speed increasing there. We have startup and we have shutdown. Second stage is now traveling 27,140 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 605 kilometers.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And that's the call we wanted to hear. That's what we didn't get to hear with Virgin Orbit today.
We did have confirmation of a good orbit. That means that we did have SES-2 and SECO-2. The OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload is now still attached to Falcon 9's second stage. Now coming up next, we do have 3 separate deployments of all 40 satellites. Now the first set of satellite deployments is scheduled to occur in just a couple minutes from now. After the first block of satellites are deployed, the second and third deploy sequences will likely begin in a blackout period. Now, once we regain connection to our second stage, we'll come back live to confirm successful deployments of the satellites that deployed during the blackout period and cover the rest of the deployments left in each sequence. Now, luckily, we should have coverage of the entire first deployment sequence, which will deploy 14 satellites. Now, deployment should start here in just a little over a minute and a half from now. But if you're just now joining us, welcome to our webcast for the OneWeb Launch 16 mission. So far, we've had a nominal mission with liftoff at 11:50 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida. We also had a successful recovery of the first stage for the second time for this booster. Stage 2 has now completed its 2 burns for this mission. And again, we are just about a minute away from the first payload deployment sequence. Again, that is the first of 3 sequences for deploying the payloads on this mission.
This first batch of deployments, we'll see 1 and 2 launch together, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12, and 13 and 14. They will deploy in groups of 2, starting 58 minutes, 49 seconds into flight. With the next batch, the last of those 2 launching 1 minute 4 seconds. So there is a little bit of time, about 30 seconds in between each batch. So we're going to listen in as we await confirmation and deployment, and hopefully have some great visual views of deployment here this evening. Should be about 20 seconds away from deployment. As a
reminder, OneWeb is a connectivity wholesaler that provides connectivity solutions at scale in pursuit of bridging the digital divide around the world. Now, today's mission will mark OneWeb's 16th overall launch and bring their LEO constellation to over 80% completion with 542 satellites in space. Now we are just a few seconds away from the first set of satellites beginning to deploy from the second stage, so let's listen into the nets and keep our eyes on the live screen there.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 1 and Alpha 5, separation confirmed.
And good callouts there. We've had the first 2 satellites deploy.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 4 and Alpha 8, separation confirmed.
And there we've had the second set of satellites deploy. That confirms 4 of the 14 in this first deployment sequence. We're currently in the...
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 1 and Bravo 5, separation confirmed.
And great call out there, and you can actually see the satellites deploying, drifting away from second stage there. That confirms 6 of the 14 have deployed.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 1 and Charlie 5, separation confirmed.
And another couple have been confirmed as well. That is 8 of the 14 in this deployment sequence.
Expected loss of signal, Diego Garcia.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, separation confirmed.
And a really cool view of that one right there. We did see a satellite drifting away from second stage with callouts on the nets of the confirmation of deployment. We're roughly 30 seconds away from the next set of satellites that will be deployed in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 4 and Bravo 8, separation confirmed.
Great news, and we did see in the top left-hand corner of the screen, another set of satellites have been deployed from the Falcon 9 second stage. And that confirms 12 of the 14 satellites in this deployment sequence. So we are just waiting for a couple more, which should be deploying here shortly.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 3 and Alpha 7, separation confirmed.
And great call out there. And we also were able to see the last 2 satellites in this deployment sequence drift away from Falcon 9. So with confirmation of successful deployment of the first 14 OneWeb satellites from the second stage, we are heading into a coast phase that contains a blackout period. Our second deployment sequence is scheduled to start around T plus 1 hour and 14 minutes. We should regain connection with our second stage at T plus 1 hour and 17 minutes. And if we do, we'll be sure to confirm the deployments that happened during the blackout period and bring you live coverage of the rest of the second deployment sequence. As I mentioned earlier, if we're able to regain ground station coverage earlier than expected, then we'll be sure to provide live views, so stay tuned. For now, sit back and enjoy the space views.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. The first 14 OneWeb satellites out of 40 have successfully been deployed and confirmed. We've got a little bit of a break here, about 9 minutes until that next batch begins deployment. But as they said, unfortunately, they will have a little bit of a lack of ground station as they go over Russia and the Arctic. And then they will pick that back up as they come back over on the North American side of the planet, and we'll have live views resume then. So I'll call out scheduled deployments as the clock continues through the count here. But if you guys have questions, you can continue sending those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those live through the remainder. All payload deployments will be complete by T+1 hour, 35 minutes, 17 seconds. So less than 30 minutes left in today's mission, with the deployment of 26 more satellites still to come. Almost all of those are in batches of 2, but we do have a few that will be single ejections as well. That starting up with the next one, we will have a batch of 2 with 15 and 16. 17 will be a solo, 18 and 19 a pair, 20, 21 a pair, 22, 23 a pair, 24, 25 a pair, 26, 27 a pair, and then that will be the completion of the second batch, and we'll go into the third batch as we go into that final part of today's countdown. But we'll see those couple last minutes of these live views on screen until we have a drop of that ground station coverage, until we have regained it on the other side of the planet. And you can keep sending in those questions, and we'll work on answering those live. Sharp asking, who is OneWeb? OneWeb is a competitor to Starlink, also offering internet communication satellites. They deploy their satellites up at a 1,200 kilometer altitude, where they're deploying over 600 kilometers in altitude, and then they'll maneuver their way up to their final orbit. Starlink deploys at a 300 to 400 kilometer altitude and lives at a 500 kilometer altitude. So these are already deploying higher than where the Starlink constellation lives. Have a good night, Iron. Thanks for being here. White Rabbit asking how the satellites are attached and jettisoned. Every one is different. SpaceX with Starlink will actually spin their second stage, and they will have deployment. These, I believe, do have, are jettisoned. They basically just detach, and that's what floats them away. With it, you can see when we had that second stage view that there was not a real spin to the craft, so there is some sort of most likely spring mechanism that is used to deploy that, but I'd have to double check specifically what type of mechanism it is. William, held with hooks and propelled with springs. That's what I was assuming. That makes the most sense. It's the least impactful to the second stage and to the payload itself, because ultimately in space, any force and reaction has the equal opposite reaction. So that's what we are having there. Payload deployments expected to continue in less than 5 minutes now. And we expect to regain live telemetry views in about 6 minutes. Ed thought there was another launch after this one. There was supposed to be. Should have been about 35 minutes ago, but unfortunately due to weather at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, they did have to delay that launch by 24 hours, and we'll be having another attempt tomorrow night. So we will, of course, bring that to you live. And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We are about to begin the second batch out of 3 batches of payload deployments. SpaceX Falcon 9 second stage is currently over a point where we do not have ground station coverage. So it is passing over the northern part of Russia, and then it will come back over to the North American side of the world. But we are coming up on deployments here. At this moment, number 15 and 16 OneWeb satellites should have deployed. Coming up to another one here. And satellite number 17 should have just deployed. We've got about 1 minute until the next deployment here. So these are when the scheduled deployments will occur. Once SpaceX does have ground telemetry regained, they will be able to confirm all of these, and we should have live views of that second stage, and we should be able to have full coverage all the way through the end of deployments here today. 41 OneWeb satellites in total on board today. 30 seconds away from the next pair of OneWeb satellites. OneWeb 18 and 19 should have just deployed. And we got almost 2 minutes here until the next pair. So you can keep sending in your questions, and we'll work on answering those as we wait for further deployments to occur. And hopefully we'll have live views regain here in the next minute or so, possibly 2. LR, do most spacefaring nations, except China and Russia, use the same ground station to connect to their rockets? So there are many ground stations that are government and many that are private. So they all can use different ones depending on the vehicle and depending on agreements that have been made. So like Russia has ground stations, but we cannot use them. Let's listen in to update.
Time liftoff, first stage landing, and 2 second stage burns, as well as successful deployment of the first 14 OneWeb satellites. Now, during the blackout period, we should have started our second payload deployment sequence around the T+1 hour and 14-minute mark. And once we regain connection to our second stage shortly, our operators on console should be able to confirm the satellites that deployed during the blackout period, and we should be able to bring you live views of the rest of the 8 satellites set to deploy in this sequence. Now that is coming up in just under a minute from now, where we should be able to regain ground station coverage and provide you live views.
OneWeb 20 and 21 should have just deployed.
Again, if you're just now joining us, we are currently in a blackout period. We should have begun our second payload deployment sequence around the T+1.
OneWeb spacecraft separations confirmed.
And great news, we did have confirmation.
Signal swap hard.
With confirmation of 5 payload deploys, as well as regained ground station coverage, as you can see live there. Satellites drifting away from Falcon 9's second stage.
OneWeb sat Charlie 3 and Charlie 7, separation confirmed.
That additional 2 satellites confirms 7 in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb sat Delta 4 and Delta 8, separation confirmed.
And there you can see another set drifting away from the second stage. There is a total of 13 in this deployment sequence, and we do have 4 satellites left. you're just now joining us, we are in the second deployment sequence of 3. We deployed 14 in the first deployment sequence. We have 13 scheduled to deploy in the second deployment sequence. And so far we have deployed 9 and are awaiting 4 more satellite deployments in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 3 and Delta 7, separation confirmed.
Great live views there as you watch the satellites drift away from Falcon 9. That confirms another 2, and we just have 2 more for this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 2 and Charlie 6, separation confirmed.
And as you heard and can visually see on your screen, we've had the last 2 satellites deploy in this deployment sequence, and that confirms successful deployment of all 13 satellites in the second deployment sequence. Now, so far, we've deployed 27 of 40 total satellites in today's mission. Our third and final payload deployment sequence should begin around the T+ 1 hour and 29-minute mark, but we likely won't have ground station coverage until 3 minutes after the third deployment sequence begins. Now, if we're able to connect to a different ground station earlier, we'll be sure to bring real-time views of deployment in, but for now, relax and enjoy some more Space Tunes.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here. We are now 1 hour, 21 minutes into flight. As Jesse just said there, we have another short, about 7-minute pause until the final batch of OneWeb satellites are deployed here tonight. The final 12 of the 40 that were on board today's Falcon 9 mission. If you haven't yet, though, take a moment and engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, space briefing, space news update, or exclusive one-on-one interview. And we'll be glad to see you back here for more launches in the future. We've got a couple of them coming up here. Obviously, one was scheduled for tonight right after Starlink 2-4. That has been delayed until tomorrow, so we hope you'll join us for that. Also on the schedule, Falcon Heavy is currently pending for January 13th. We have a GPS-3 mission on a Falcon 9 on January 18th. And out of Japan, we have an H-2A-202 rocket launching on January 24th. We also have the chance that Relativity will see the launch of their Terran 1 rocket, as well as a number of other Starlink missions set for this month. So we hope we will see you back here for those. You can follow along with all of the upcoming missions over at tlpnetwork.com/launches. That's where our TLP launch control is available, and you can see all launches and whether we will have a live feed for that launch or not. We're still in the process of pre-scheduling a lot of the launches, so make sure you keep updating those mission briefings over the coming week as we always schedule our live launch coverages and pair them into our mission briefings, and that's where you can see it in advance, or if you miss a launch, you can always catch it on the replay. We're now coming to about 6 minutes until deployments will begin for the final batch of tonight's OneWeb satellites. Great to have so many of you here. It's great to see you, John. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Now, we're super excited for Falcon Heavy. See another one there. Falcon Heavy was rolled out to the pad earlier today, this evening. And yeah, Japan launches are always exciting. We don't see them all that often, so we'll, of course, bring you live launch coverage of that. So make sure you join us back here for that. We, of course, are tracking also the return of Cargo Dragon. There will not be live coverage of Cargo Dragon's return, as they do not bring live video feeds of that, but we will confirm Cargo Dragon's return over on our Twitter. If you haven't yet, though, consider joining us over on Discord. It's free to join. Link is in the chat and in the description below, and you can join us there. That's where our space community hangs out. We also just launched the TLP Reddit. So if you're a Reddit user, I hope you'll join us over there for our community. We got lots of plans that we're going to start rolling out on there, and we'd love to see your launch photos, and videos, and your experiences visiting different launch complexes and museums, and just have a really awesome conversation around everything space. That is also free to join as well. About 5 minutes away from deployment resuming of the final 12 OneWeb satellites. Stay with us. "60 seconds until the payload deployments of the final 12 OneWeb satellites will resume."
OneWeb Launch 16 mission webcast. We're coming up on the third and final payload deployment sequence, which should deploy another 13 OneWeb satellites. Looks like we do have a live view there, so we will just wait for the operators on console to confirm callouts.
OneWeb, Sat Echo 3 and Echo 7, separation confirmed.
Awesome, and we did get a confirmation of 2 satellites deploying. That confirms a total of 29 that have deployed so far.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 3, separation confirmed.
And great news, we did have confirmation of another 2 satellites deploying. Again, this is the third deployment sequence of 3. That puts us at 31 satellites having deployed so far.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 1 and Delta 5, separation confirmed.
Great news, another 2 satellites have deployed.
And expected loss of signal, Kodiak.
And we did just hear a call out that we did have an expected loss of signal. That means we do not have ground station coverage. We will wait to regain ground station coverage and confirm any deployments that are happening during this blackout period once we regain ground station
OneWeb,
coverage.
Sat Echo 8, separation confirmed.
Great news. There you could see on your screen
OneWeb, Sat Echo 4, separation confirmed.
several satellites drifting away from Falcon 9.
Acquisition of signal, Vandenberg.
And there's that call out that we did regain ground station coverage. And we have deployed 34 satellites so far out of the 40 for today's mission.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 2 and Delta 6, separation confirmed.
And again, as you can see on your screen, as well as hearing that call out, another 2 satellites have deployed from Falcon 9's second stage. That is 36 total out of the 40. We have 4 more satellites left to deploy.
Acquisition signal, South Texas.
Now, if you're just now joining us, you are watching
aka Starbase. If you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We're just waiting for the final deployments of the last couple of the 40 OneWeb satellites that were on board the second stage of Falcon 9 here this evening. As we get ready to wrap it up for the evening, though, with these final deployments, if it was your first time here, welcome here at the launch pad. It's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together. And if you haven't yet, take a moment and engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, space briefing, space news update, or exclusive one-on-one interview. We've got a couple launches coming up over the next week. Tonight's Starlink mission that was delayed, we'll be having another launch attempt tomorrow, so we hope you'll join us for that. We've got Falcon Heavy scheduled for January 13th. That was pushed back by 24 hours, but as we just had confirmation, Falcon Heavy has gone vertical without its payload in preparation for a static fire, and there we have the final deployment of the last of the 40 OneWeb satellites from tonight's mission. But Falcon Heavy is vertical at pad 39A ahead of a static fire. And we've got a few other missions. And of course, follow those all along at tlpnetwork.com on all those upcoming missions. If you're interested in considering joining our team, head on over to tlpnetwork.com/about us. That's where you can learn more about our team and file out applications to be a future rocket chaser, writer, part of our TLP news team, and more. But that is going to wrap us up for our live launch coverage of SpaceX OneWeb 16. We hope that we will see you next time. But for now, this is Zach from TLP Network Studios signing off. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.